Hello everyone, good morning. If you haven't met me before, my name's Chloe. I'm a member of the congregation at Hope, and I think I mentioned this before, but I'm also one of your church wardens. So if there's anything you want to talk about, or you have questions, or you don't know what a church warden does and you would like to know, please do get in touch with me. I would love to speak to you and connect. This morning it's my privilege to continue our series in John. Last week, Paul launched us into this 12-week exploration of the Gospel of John, and I am picking up the baton with Jesus' early ministry. So as the preachers of hope, we've been given big sections of the Gospel. As Paul mentioned, it's a lot to cover in 12 weeks. And then we're honing in on some specific verses and stories. So for me to think through for this week, I've been looking at John chapter 2, 3 and 4, but I'm going to focus in on the second sign of Jesus, which is in John chapter 4, from verses 43 to the end of the chapter, which is chapter 54, verse 54, sorry. So that's chapter 4, verses 43 to 54. And really today, I want to ask myself and you the question, what do you think Jesus' character is? And what do we learn about Jesus' character through his signs? So Paul mentioned to us that throughout the Gospel of John, there are 7 signs that he particularly draws attention to. And in the big section of text that I've been exploring, there are 2 signs, the first 2 signs of Jesus. So chapter 2 opens with the wedding at Cana, which is where Jesus turns water into wine. And it ends, my section ends with this healing of an official's son from a distance. In between, there's so much to talk about. There's so many things that happen. So in between these 2 signs, Jesus also turns over the tables in the temple. He talks to Nicodemus about needing to be born again. Arguably the most famous verse of the Bible is in the middle of this section, John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son. And then Jesus meets the Samaritan woman at the well. All of those things happen between the wedding in Cana and this sign where he heals the official's son. And there's so much to talk about. So I'm really going to try and focus to make sure that I don't go on forever and ever. And I'm thinking about the signs because I was so struck by Jesus's responses in both situations. So in the wedding at Cana, they run out of wine, and this would be culturally a kind of embarrassment, almost a shaming thing to run out of wine at your wedding. And it's Jesus's mother, Mary, who says, go on, Jesus, you can do something about this. And Jesus says, it's not my time yet. I'm not here for that. And Mary turns to the servants of the feast and says, do what he says. And the rest of the story unfolds, and he does turn water into wine, the best wine. And the bridegroom doesn't know, the servants know, and Jesus's disciples know, but no one else knows who did this amazing miracle of turning water into wine. And the parallel in the second sign is interesting because you see an official, a royal official, approach Jesus and ask him to come and heal his son. He explains that he's on the point of death, and he asks Jesus, come down and heal him. And Jesus says to him, go, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. And the official insists, he says, please come. And Jesus eventually says, go, your son will live. And the royal official is making his way home, and he meets his servants on the road who tell him that yes, indeed, his son is getting better. And he asks them when they noticed his son start to improve and realizes, works out that it's exactly the moment at which Jesus says, "Go, your son will live," that the fever lifts and he begins to get better. And John comments at the end, "This is the second sign." And it's interesting to me because for lots of reasons, but for two key ones. One is, in both situations, Jesus seems a bit reluctant, maybe. And the second thing is that John, or whoever we think might be putting together these stories and writing this down, he doesn't shy away from Jesus's apparent reluctance. So it's one thing being reluctant, isn't it? Doing something, not being sure about it. But if you are trying to communicate to your community that Jesus is indeed the Messiah, the Saviour of the world, it would kind of be understandable why you wouldn't highlight this element of reluctance. You would portray your Saviour as a knight on a white horse charging in to save a wedding or charging in to heal a boy. And John doesn't. He allows the reluctance, this interaction between him and his mother, between Jesus and his mother, and between Jesus and this official to stand. It's for the record, it's there for us to see. And that's what I was so struck by. And it made me wonder, what is that telling me and us about Jesus's character? What does it mean for him to have some qualms? And are they qualms, or is something else going on? And I was wondering about this, and I was wondering about why I read this and think that they're qualms. Why is it that my immediate response to Jesus saying in the first sign, "It's not yet my time," and in the second sign, "You will only believe if you see miracles," why do I interpret that as reluctance? Because it's not actually explicitly said that that is the case. Although interestingly, I would say that other translations and commentaries that I've had an explore of also imply the same, that there's a level of hesitance in Jesus's interactions about following through with these signs. And it's certainly the way that I interpret it. But why I've mentioned what happens in between these two signs briefly is because I think for me, exploring the story, the journey and the links between the wedding at Cana and Jesus healing the royal official's son reveals something to me about the character of Jesus that has got nothing to do with reluctance and everything to do with relationship. So let me try to explain what I mean and then to put an example into practice. So the kind of centre point of the section that I have is, as I mentioned before, one of the most famous, if not arguably the most famous verse in the Bible, John 3:16. But the rest of the passage is also interesting. So I'm going to read a little bit from it. So I'm going to read from John 3 verse 16 to John chapter 3 verse 20. "For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. Whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe is condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of the only Son of God. And this is the judgment. The light has come into the world, and people loved the darkness rather than the light, because their works were evil. For everyone who does wicked things hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his works should be exposed. But whoever does what is true comes to the light, so that it may be clearly seen that his works have been carried out in God." So I'm going to try and explain the connection that I feel kind of led to here. And one of the things that was really enlightening for me was to try to read this little section of John 3 in different translations, and in particular the Amplified version. So I'm now going to read verses 20 and 21 from the Amplified version of the Bible and see what you think about this. For every wrongdoer hates the light and does not come to the light for fear that his activities will be exposed and condemned. But whoever practices truth comes to the light so that his works may be plainly shown to be what they are, accomplished in God. So I have found myself reflecting on the reason why I wonder if Jesus might be reluctant, and thinking about the idea of whether I really believe that he came not to condemn but to love. Specifically, whether he came to condemn me or to love me, but also broadly came to condemn us as people or came to love us as people. And I think this little section later in just after, when he says, for God so loved the world, so I should just believe that that's the case, not to condemn but to love. But I think this little section in 20 and 21 is really helpful. Because what if Jesus is not reluctant to demonstrate his power, his glory, his identity as the Messiah at the wedding in Cana, or when he heals the royal official's son? What if it's not reluctance? What if it's an invitation? What if the reason that he says to his mother, I'm not sure I'm ready yet, is because he's relating to her and inviting her into a relationship with him, because it's reciprocal and shared. It's not about him charging in alone, showing himself as the miracle worker and the miracle doer, but he's inviting his mother to lean into the identity that she knows is true for him, but also to lean into her own identity as someone who has authority to say to the servants, do what he says. I believe in him. I know that he can do this. And what if the same can be said for the royal official? That when Jesus says, you only believe if you see miracles and signs, what if he's saying, I see you, I know that you need a miracle or a sign to believe, or this is where you are right now. Tell me that you want to know me. And then he has this opportunity, and the official takes it, of saying, sir, please come, I do believe, heal my son. So in both situations, maybe Jesus is not reluctant to brush off the opportunity of showing his identity as the Messiah, but it's more that he wants to do that in relationship with the people that he's around. He's not interested in a passive charging in, or us being passive, I should say, him charging in, doing all the work. He wants us to be part of the story. And this is where I think the imagery with light and darkness and chapter 3, 20 and 21 is helpful. Because if you see in the Amplified version, what it says about wrongdoers is it says that they hate the light and they don't come to the light because they fear that activities will be exposed and condemned. And I think it's such an interesting use of language, because literally in 2 verses before, they've explicitly said, John's explicitly said that Jesus came not to condemn. And what he's saying is that wrongdoers still don't believe it. They believe they'll be condemned, and so they won't come into the light. Whereas people who come into the light truly believe that Jesus loves them. They truly believe that they are not condemned as the people that they are, but they are loved and they can be transformed in the light. What it says in 21 is that the works are accomplished in God, accomplished in relationship with God. And if you take it a step further, I have been wondering for myself, if actually it's not the practice of wrongdoing or right doing, that makes the difference. About it's not because you do wrong that you fear stepping into the light and you stay in the darkness. It's the other way round. It's that the longer you stay in the dark, the more kind of wrong, if you'd like to say, your attitudes and actions become, the further away from Jesus. Whereas you step into the light and you're still the same person, you're still you, but you are transformed by coming into the light. I think this is slightly confusing, and I've been really trying to think about how to explain or make sense of it in a realistic way that feels like I can make sense of it in my own life, and also scrutinise whether maybe it's true or maybe it's me trying to make myself feel better about the reality that it is to follow Jesus in life. And I have two kinds of thoughts. So when the sermon series for this term was put together, Paul kindly put us a guide together, and the title that he has for this second section of John that we're exploring is the title Hope That Breaks the Mould. Hope That Breaks the Mould. And it got me thinking about hope and what this passage, what these sections, what these signs might tell us about hope. And I've used this analogy before, but I find it really helpful. I don't like the dentist. I really don't like the dentist. I really struggle. And I haven't been for a long time because essentially I'm scared. And that's not a sensible way to look after your teeth. I should definitely go to the dentist. But I think what I recognise in myself is, if and when I have been to the dentist, it's been a while, but I employ a kind of hope where I strap myself in, sometimes almost literally into the chair. I let my fate rest with somebody else in my mouth and my teeth. I hold on for dear life and I hope that eventually it will be over. I know it will be. I know that I won't be in the dentist chair forever, but my hope is held in this end point that will come on the other side. And I quite like to just close my eyes, screw them up as tightly as I can, and pretend that I'm somewhere else. Just hold on and wait for it to be over, knowing that my hope is in having healthier teeth on the other side of it, but not enjoying the process whatsoever. And I wonder how often my relationship with Jesus reflects that kind of hope. That following him is sometimes like just holding on tight and waiting to be transformed, knowing that it will get better in the end, but kind of wishing your way to that end rather than sitting and living here and now in my life. And I think that the reason that this hope breaks the mould is that this invitation into the light is not an invitation to pretend that you have it all together or that you're doing everything right. What it says is those that step into the light may plainly know that their works are accomplished in God, in relationship with him. So instead of me being in the dark of the dentist chair, just waiting for it to be over, really frightened, it's like Jesus holds out his hand to me, says, Chloe, open your eyes, come in with me, and we step into the light together. And the hope there is still that my teeth will probably need a filling or that I might be in pain, but I am no longer alone. And that I'm transformed by the light that I stand in because Jesus stands there with me. And I will still get things wrong. I will still make a mess. I still won't be the person that I'm created to be at all times. I'm only a person. But if I am willing to step into that light rather than live in fear that keeps me in the darkness, then I can experience life to the full. I wanted to also try to give a real life example for me, to try to kind of work out what this means for my life now. And I wanted to talk about something that feels maybe relatively small, but has can have a significant impact over time. And I was thinking a lot about what it means to step from darkness into light, and where Jesus has given me an opportunity, like he does the royal official, to respond, to step into relationship with him, rather than waiting for a miracle, holding on in that dentist chair, just waiting for him to transform me. And I was thinking a lot about my experience at school. So I'm going to be 34 this year, which means that it's nearly 20 years since I was at secondary school. And so I feel almost a little embarrassed to talk about it, because I feel like it should be part of the annals of my history and not something that lives with me day to day now. But in that way, I think it's precisely why I should talk about it today. So I had a difficult time at secondary school in particular. Fine from a work point of view. In fact, work was where I hid and where I flourished. I could do my homework and pass my tests and things. But socially, things were a real struggle. And I left school, or secondary school. I went on to develop an amazing group of friends when I did my A-levels. But at school, I was very much on my own. I really struggled to form relationships that were kind of meaningful or lasting. And I carried with me a huge amount of shame about that there was something wrong with me, something that meant that I was defective or, I don't know, just not right in some way. And I met Jesus at a similar time in my life, which was this incredible intervention of the Spirit. And I met him, and certainly my experience of hope and of identity and of what it meant to be a person started to grow from that place. But what happened when as I moved away from home eventually and into my 20s, was this lingering sense of shame and embarrassment and kind of somehow that I was substandard in some way, that I didn't deserve the relationships that I had. And what that did to my relationship with myself, but also my relationship with Jesus, is that I began to take on this idea that I didn't deserve grace and love and freedom. And what that did is shrink slowly the character of God and Jesus and who he might be in my life, who I could allow him to be, essentially because I was really frightened. I was frightened of being hurt and being alone again, of not having friends, of the fears about myself being true, that I was in fact worthless and I didn't deserve a place in the world. And so that fear led me to a kind of darkness, in that I held it together very well on the surface, and I did have friends and make relationships, and, you know, I got a job and I functioned in life, in day-to-day life, because I believed and I lent into this idea that I had to be a good person. I did the right thing, and that was what it meant to be in the light, was to do good, to be not a wrongdoer but a right doer. And over the last few years, I've really been slowly coming to terms with the idea that not only did I live under a lie as a teenager, that I was unworthy, unlovable and useless, I also lived under a lie in my 20s that said that I could fix it by being a good follower of Jesus, that my identity was held purely in what I did rather than inherently in who I was. And what's interesting about this journey for me is that there is a continuing invitation to step into the light. So what I want to try to say is that my experience at school was really difficult and challenging, and I could have stepped into the light at that moment recognizing my identity in Jesus and growing in confidence and surety that I was worth something, made for some specific place in the world, that Jesus had a plan for me, but I didn't. I leant into the darkness further, which was fear, and said, I need to earn it. I need to do the right things and be a good enough person and demonstrate that I'm worth something. I was invited again into the light in that period of my life, through people and relationships, through experiences when in prayer or reading the Bible. I remember someone having a picture for me once that struck at something that I couldn't articulate, but knew that it was touching on this idea of, you don't have to earn it. I have made you and I love you. I think you are worthy. But I didn't step into it. And now I'm 33, going on 34. I was at school nearly 20 years ago, and I'm still figuring out how to step into the light. I'm still working out what it means to not be in darkness, not be clinging on to the sides of the dentist chair and hoping for Jesus to transform me, knowing that he can and that he will, because he's gracious and he loves me. But stepping into the light, which means that I get to live a life, a full life, whilst he transforms me and redeems me. And I think that today this is such an important process for me to be in, because I am not a done deal. I'm not a finished product. I'm not the finished article. I'm not ready, and I won't ever be. Not probably, I will never be. This is the journey of my lifetime, and I will be continually invited to step into the light. And so I believe that John intentionally leaves these interactions in both of these first two signs. In the wedding at Cana, Jesus interacts with his mother. In the royal official's son, Jesus interacts with the official, not as a spirit of reluctance, not saying to his mum, I'm not ready, don't bother me, or not saying to the official, you only want to see miracles, I'm not doing that unless you really believe. But I believe that John has left them there as invitations, as Jesus saying, I'm with you, I will heal your son. I am with you, we should celebrate at this wedding. Come with me, let's do it together. Let's do this together. And so these signs for me are absolutely signs of Jesus's miraculous power to heal from a distance at his own word, of Jesus's joy and creativity to celebrate a wedding and to be part of that feast and that foreshadowing of the feast that we get to go to. But it's so much more than that. For me today, these signs are also signs of a Jesus who loves me, who is not interested in condemning, but interested in transforming, interested in inviting me in to figure out together what it means to live in the light, for me to not be ashamed of the 14-year-old me, or the 24-year-old me that still had it a bit wrong, or the 34-year-old me that no doubt in 1 year's time, in 10 years' time, I will realise I've still got things wrong. Of course that's going to happen, but I don't have to be ashamed of anyone I was or anyone I am now, because I want to step into the light and do it accomplished in God, in relationship with him who tells me this is going to be hard. You have to open your eyes. The light will shine things on difficult areas, but I am with you. I love you. Let's do this together.